Holy Gospel of our Lord Jesus Christ according to Matthew.
Glory to you, Lord Christ.
Jesus was born in Bethlehem in Judah during the reign of King Herod. About that time, some wise men from the eastern lands arrived in Jerusalem, asking, "Where is the newborn King of the Jews? We saw his star as it rose, and we have come to worship him." King Herod was deeply disturbed when he heard this, as with everyone in Jerusalem. He called a meeting of the leading priests and teachers of religious law and asked, "Where is the Messiah supposed to be born?" "In Bethlehem of Judah," they said, "for this is what the prophet wrote. And you, O Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are not least among the ruling cities of Judah, for a ruler will come from you, who will be the shepherd for my people Israel." And Herod called for a private meeting with the wise men, and he learned from them the time when the star first appeared. Then he told them, "Go to Bethlehem and search carefully for the child, and when you find him, come back and tell me, so that I can go and worship him too." After this interview, the wise men went their way, and the star they had seen in the east guided them to Bethlehem. It went ahead of them and stopped over the place where the child was. When they saw the star, they were filled with joy. They entered the house and saw the child with his mother Mary, and they bowed down and worshipped him. Then they opened their treasure chest and gave him gold, frankincense, and myrrh. When the time came to leave, they returned to their own country by another route, for God had warned them in a dream not to return to Herod. The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Lord Christ.
Before I get into the sermon, I need to let you all know I have not changed the service. I've put things back in that we have taken out. So don't think this is new. I need to let you all know. The Gloria is where we have been doing a praise and worship song, and we have that option to switch it out and do something else, which we have done for a while. By doing so, we have taken out the sequence hymn, which is commonly done between the epistle, the New Testament reading, and the gospel. And I thought for the season of Epiphany, we're going to put the Gloria back in, and then add our song in the sequence time, just to move things around. It's still the same service, we just kind of, and it gives us that option to do those things. So I don't want anybody to go, oh, what? So just so you know, that if you would open a prayer book, you would see, oh, we have those options. So we took advantage of those. So I wanted to share that with you, so you're not thinking, where did she get some of these ideas? This morning, I want to talk about Epiphany. But I want to start with a little thought. Now, I know some of you may be like me. When you start a cleaning project to organize a closet or a bookshelf, you end up getting sidetracked. I am tempted to stop and open the boxes that are in the closet or open a photo album, and the next thing I know, the time I had planned for cleaning is evaporated because I've sat there reminiscing. We all have done that or are like to do that. Well, this past fall when I got new carpet, I had to really be disciplined not to do that because I was on a schedule. I had to get it done. But when I went to put things back, I did allow myself the luxury of going through boxes and reminiscing and looking at photo albums. And I sorted books and knickknacks. And some of these things I passed on to my children. Some I tossed or put in the boxes for our yard sale. And some things found the round file, but the treasures I kept. So as I was studying for this Sunday of Epiphany, I found myself getting sidetracked. And I was opening all the boxes on the internet, in my commentaries and other resources that I use as I build sermons, because I wanted to really talk about Epiphany. And then the thought hit me, wait a second, keep the treasures of Epiphany and put the rest of this stuff away for another time. So what are the treasures of today? Today is January 6th, the true day we celebrate Epiphany. It is a feast of the church. We're still in white. Next week, we'll be in green. The celebration of Epiphany always lands on January 6th, the 12th night of Christmas. It is the day we acknowledge that Jesus is not just the King of the Jews, but the King of all people. He came for each one of us, for the Gentiles. It reminds us that God is with us. He is made manifest in the flesh. This celebration will go until Ash Wednesday. We celebrate the realization and understand that Jesus is the Messiah, He is the Lord, He is King of all. Now, some of you may remember the word Epiphany is used in other ways. How many of you remember the commercial from years ago from Ford and the light bulb clicked on? That is another word for Epiphany, illuminate. It's the Feast of Lights. I am blessed I have a stole with a star on it. We celebrate those who can follow the star, follow the light of Christ. In John it says, Jesus spoke to the people once more, and Jesus said, I am the light of the world. If you follow me, you won't walk in darkness, because you have seen the light, and the light leads you to life. That's what Epiphany celebrates. The promise of God to all people and all nations. Our gospel told us that Jesus is King of the Jews, that Jesus is King of all people. And I've read all these scriptures, but I find myself sometimes on Sunday when I hear it read, something pops out. And when Linda read in Isaiah, it said, all nations will come to your light. Mighty kings will come to see your radiance. That is what we celebrate. His radiance. The Magi, the wise men, came to celebrate that. They weren't Jews. They were from Persia, is what the scholars believe, also known as Babylon. And they were not kings. They were wise men. Kings came about in around the 5th century is when they got dubbed kings. They were astronomers. They were wise. In the book of Daniel, which was written by Daniel in Babylon, it says, so I issue an order calling all the wise men of Babylon. So there's the belief that this is where they came from. Biblical scholars feel that one, that from the book of Daniel, we read about the wise men. But the second reason is they believe there were still Jews living in Persia because they didn't all return to Jerusalem after the exile was over. Some stayed behind. And those who were living in Persia would have had the Old Testament scrolls. And these wise men would have known of these manuscripts and known of the prophecies. Now, we don't know if there were really 3 wise men or magi. There could have been many more. What we know is they brought 3 gifts. Why the suspicion that there may have been more? Because they disturbed Herod. 3 wise men coming in may not have disturbed him as much as a large caravan. Because it said it disturbed all of Jerusalem. It had to be pretty big to disrupt a large city. These wise men covered thousands of miles to seek the newborn king. God led them with a star. And there are 2 prophecies about that. In Psalm 72 it says, western kings of Tarshish and other lands will bring tribute to him. The eastern kings will bring him gifts. All kings will bow before him. All nations will serve him. And in Isaiah again, Vast caravans of camels will converge on the camels will come from Media and Ephah, and the people of Sheba will bring him gold and frankincense. They will come and worship the Lord. And we know they brought 3 gifts. These gifts were expensive and worthy of a king. These gifts from these magi were worship. Each of these gifts symbolizes the kingship of Jesus. And they were spoken of in the Old Testament, as I just read. Again in Psalm 72, long live the king, may the gold of Sheba be given to him. This is a gift given to kings. Then we have frankincense. In the vernacular, it's incense. It's a glittering aromatic gum from the bark of a tree, and it's given to deity. So when you read about mythology and they have incense, but if you read the Old Testament, it says they lit incense in the temple of God. So they brought him incense. And lastly, myrrh. Now we know that it was used in embalming, but it's also given to kings and princes because it would perfume their robes. And you find that in Psalm 45. Aloes and myrrh perfume the robes. So they gave him worthy gifts of a king, and they fell and worshipped him. This morning, I had no clue where God was leading when I started writing this sermon. I thought it might have been about the star, or about how God revealed himself to the wise men in a dream. But as I started to work on the sermon, the word worship kept coming up. And in verse 11 of Matthew, they entered the house, they saw the child with his mother, and they bowed and worshipped him. And in Matthew 28, it says, when they saw him, they worshipped him. You go, wait a second. Matthew 2, Matthew 28. Those are bookends that Matthew placed in his gospel accounts. The first is of the kings, the magi, coming to worship. And the verse I just read is the apostles and the disciples worshiping him before he ascends to heaven. We are called to worship the King. The wise men worshipped and the disciples worshipped. Jesus calls us all to worship, all nations to worship. And he gives us a commissioning to do that. Therefore go and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, of the Son, and the Holy Spirit. A few moments ago we sang, angels from the realms of glory, come and worship. You must need to know, I don't know what we're going to sing, usually, until Michelle prints out the bulletin for me. And I went, I wonder if we're singing that song. I came up and found and it was like, God put it together. We're called to worship. So I guess I should pose the question, who do we worship and how do we worship? Now worship, the definition has different connotations, it has different forms and different styles. The worship I'm speaking of is a verb. It's an action on our part. The definition of worship is an action of showing reverence to God and respect and devotion. So who do we worship? Now there are people not sitting here today but are out walking the streets. They don't worship the Lord of Lords and the King of Kings. They may be worshiping the almighty dollar. They may be worshiping other forms of religion, New Age, whatever it might be. So that's why I ask, make sure you know who you worship. Are you worshiping the triune God, the Alpha and the Omega? Spirit of God, our comforter and advocate? We profess this each week in our creed, so we must know who we worship. When we share our faith with people, and share with them the love of Jesus, it's a form of worship. When we study our Bibles and we say our prayers, it's a form of worship. Worship is a sacrifice on our part, placing our needs, our desires, our issues to God. It's turning off the television and picking up our Bible. It's not listening to the news first thing in the morning, but opening our scriptures. Those are worship. That's denying self to spend time with God. In Romans it says, by the mercies of God, present your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and acceptable to God, which is your spiritual worship. So anytime we sacrifice self for others, it's worship. All we do in our lives as Christians is worship. Now there is Sunday morning corporate worship where we come together and we worship as a body. At ordination, we are called, whether you're going into the priesthood or into the diaconate, the beginning of the service, we are called to lay ourselves out in front of the altar. A bodily sense of we're giving ourselves up to Christ. It's a form of worship. When we put ourselves aside for God, we worship. Now we all express it differently. Some of us sit quietly. For others, it's we sing and that's how we worship. For others, it's raising our hands. And in some cases, people actually dance. And if you wonder if it's scriptural, yes, King David danced for the Lord when the Ark of the Covenant was brought into Jerusalem. Then in Acts we read of the beggar who Peter healed through Christ, and it says he went walking and leaping, dancing for God. All forms of worship is worship. The wise men worshipped. When they bowed, they worshipped. When they gave their gifts, they worshipped. When we give money to Anglican Relief, it's a form of worship. When we put our money in the plates on Sunday morning, it's a form of worship. When we put a box together for Samaritan's Purse, it's a form of worship. When we act as a lay reader or a button pusher, or what Nikki's doing this morning, the PowerPoint, it's a form of worship. When we work in the office, it's a form of worship. When we volunteer within our community, and I know there's many of you do things out in the community, it's a form of worship. Whatever we do for Christ, it's worship. When God tugs at your heart and you answer with a yes, it's worship. So as we enter 2019, my prayer for each of us, that we will recognize that all we say and do, we do for the glory of God, which is worship. Amen.